Number 1.
A little lesson. It is kind of what I feel like my life has become. Almost like one of those History Channel specials. History's Mysteries. Haunted History. I have a long history with the paranormal, my family included. But since my great mother passed, I seem to be the only one who embraced it, instead of treating it like a disease. I guess to understand my ghost stories, we have to go back to the start. Back to my start. Funeral homes. They are not just places for the dead, or Hollywood movies like My Girl. They are real places, and real homes. In fact, a funeral home is where I lived the first 4 years of my life. A funeral home is where I was born. A funeral home in Cleveland, Ohio. My grandfather and grandmother were thrilled that their 17-year-old daughter was going to be having a baby. They were not your usual parents. However, my mother did not pick the greatest guy in the world to have a kid with. 9 months passed and my older sister was born, and her father was kicked out and quickly found himself in prison. My mother decided to live with her parents, my grandparents, in my grandfather's funeral home. My mother raised my sister there, and soon I was conceived there. It was not long before my father moved in as well. So, there they all were, living and functioning as a normal family in a very abnormal home. Still with me? Here's where I come in. One day my grandparents decided to go off on a car ride, enjoying their day off. My father went to work at a company called Rollcraft. No idea what they did. And Mentor. And my sister headed off to school. She was now age 8. While all alone in the seemingly normal home, my mother went into labor. By the time everyone got home, it was too late. I was a quick comer. They took my mother downstairs, and I was born next to a young man named David, who had passed away from a car accident just a bit earlier that day. Keep in mind, this is not fiction. This is honestly my life. The basement was split up into 2 sections, the body room, and mine and my sister's playrooms, where we spent most of the day and took our naps. It was in that room that I had my very first experience that I can remember, at the age of 3. But I'll get to that in a moment. There's a bit more you need to know about my history. On my father's side, there were experienced spiritual members of the Cherokee Indian tribe. On my mother's side, there were a mix of both Hungarian and German gypsies. Most every woman in my family on my mother's side had a strong connection to the paranormal world. However, they all treated it like it was something to be ashamed of, a sickness, unholy. My mother had gotten herself blessed at the age of 16 in a Catholic church. Because of this, she swore she was the last. In my sister's years, she showed not a single sign of the family baggage. Then I was born. My mother once told me when I was old enough to understand what was happening to me, that as an infant, I would often laugh at the wall, or talk to people who were not there in baby gibberish. All of the signs that my sister lacked, I obtained. This brings me back to my first experience. Now that you know my history, I guess here lies the first of my ghost stories. The bed in the playroom where my sister and I would often sleep was old. Comfortable, but old. The footboard was rotting, and the headboard was completely gone. I remember clearly a small space between the mattress and wall. The bed was much taller than me. It took a bit of a climb for me to get in and out. A late bloomer, I still slept with a pacifier, despite my mother's efforts to rid me of it. It comforted me, but did damage to my teeth. One day my sister had gotten permission to stay with a friend, and it was nearing my nap time. I remember my mother picking me up and taking me downstairs. I was lucky in that she was tired also, so I wouldn't be napping alone. We walked down the stairs and my mother placed me in the bed. Being as tired as she was, it didn't take long for my mother to fall asleep, leaving me in the dark to stare at anything I could see. I played with the pacifier between my fingers, and it slipped away from me, down between the mattress and wall. Ever the fearless child, I scooted my head to the crack and peered down, to see if I could see my pacifier. But to my horror, all I could see was a bright pair of clear eyes staring back at me. I yelped for my mother, shook her, but nothing seemed to wake her. I did what most children do when scared. I threw the blankets over my head and closed my eyes tight. I waited. Unsure of how much time had passed, I wondered, why hasn't it got me yet? I slowly removed the covers just enough to expose my eyes, and saw something. A darkly outlined shape on the bed next to me. I reached for it, and there it was, my pacifier sitting right in my hand when it had clearly fallen. I suppose I will never know if this was a paranormal experience, the first of very many to come, or if it was just a child's imagination. All I know to be fact is, I laid in that bed until my mother woke. I never napped downstairs again. And from that day on, a child who had never feared the dark formed her fear of not knowing what hides within it. And up until nearly 3 years ago, that fear had not dissipated. Well, that was my history, and my first of many ghost stories. I hope you enjoyed hearing about my life in the paranormal. This seemed much more productive than a journal. Good night.
Number 2.
When I was a small child, age 7, I was at my godfather's house with my papa. I got bored, so I asked Papa if I could play outside on the porch swing. I went out the door, and I saw a man with a white shirt on and blue jeans standing on the sidewalk. I got on the swing and watched him. He said, "Hello, Jennifer," and walked up on the porch and took a seat beside me. I didn't know this man, and had never seen him. He looked weird to me. He had a greenish tint to him, and he had the greenest eyes I've ever seen. Black hair that looked like Elvis hair. He said, "I've been watching you." I said, "You have?" I was thinking so hard on who this man was, and how he knew me. He put his hand on my left leg and said, "You have been a good girl." I smiled big, and said I'd try to make Mom happy. By that time, Papa came out to check on me. The look on his face when he came over at me will never leave me. It looked like he had seen a ghost, a bad one at that. He yelled at me to get inside now. I took my time going in, and by the time I got up, Papa had a Bible in his hand and grabbed my hand and went to throw me in the house. This man who came to talk stood up and looked at me and said, "I'll be back for you," and turned to smoke. Gone. Just like that. Before my eyes. Papa and Schubert were on their knees praying fast, and Papa was crying so hard he couldn't talk right. When Papa came back in, I asked what happened, and who was that man. He said, very mean-like, "Don't worry, and never ask about this again." I started thinking about all the weird things that were going on in my life, at home, in my room, and the rest of the house. Things moving, people talking. One night, my mom woke up to a man at my bedroom door. She grabbed her gun to shoot him, and no one was there, or in the house. Papa came the next morning and walked around praying and crying to God. I asked about that man again. He said, "I do not know what you are talking about." Years passed on, and my mom got married and moved me to Knoxville to her new husband's house. I had a room on the ground floor. As soon as I walked in, I felt sadness. It was a few nights, and yet again, people talking to me that were not there. People knocking on my door and everyone's in bed. I thought I was going crazy, until I moved out on my own, and it was a never-ending story. Things moving, people talking to me, and a lot of my pictures had things in them that no one could explain to me. It was July 25th of 2002, and I had an okay night. I thought I was going to have a good night's sleep. I went to get into bed, and as soon as I closed my eyes, there was that man, but this time, He had a navy blue jacket on. He was in my face, moving so fast I couldn't see him. Just a black swirl. His eyes were so green they glowed. He stopped and laughed at me, then pulled my hair and slapped me in the face. I tried to scream, and I couldn't move or cry. I was helpless. I came to with my husband yelling, "Oh my God! Jennifer! Are you okay?" I jumped up, crying so hard I could not breathe, and yelled, "Did you see him?" He said, "Who?" I said, "That guy." He said, "All I saw was you cover up. Then your body was shaking, and you looked like you were stroking out." I told him what I had seen, and what happened. He said he did see my hair move like it was being pulled, but he said he was scared because I was stiff like a board. I couldn't sleep, but I dozed off sometime in the night. The next morning, I went to Papa's and Graham's. I was mad when I got there, just knowing Papa was going to talk silly child things to me about that man I saw that day. I went in and said, "We need to talk." I told him what happened, what he looked like, and what he had on. I'm talking about the man I saw when I was 7 years old. Graham started to cry, and Papa then soon started. Grams got up and got a picture and gave it to me. She said, "Is this him?" I felt sick when I looked and saw that it was him. I looked up at her with tears in my eyes and asked, "Who is this man? And why does he follow me and now do things to me that I cannot explain?" She said, "Jennifer, it's your grandfather." I was lost. Papa was my grandfather. She said, "No, he is your step-grandfather." That's when she told me it was my mom's and uncle's real father, and he was evil. He was killed by my great-aunt when he came from Alabama, where they were at to get my mom. He had beat my mom and uncles and my Grams. Graham sent my mom to Loudoun County to get away from him before he killed her. Well, he has been dead since July 25th of 1979. I asked Papa why he didn't tell me, and why did he make me think I was crazy all these years. He said people are mean, and would think you were crazy if you told. Plus, I didn't want you to know. He said, "Frank has followed you since birth, and why, I do not know. Maybe because you look so much like your mom." Years passed, and still to this day, even my kids see people walking by, water dripping on you, and no water to be found. I have a child call me Mama all the time. I know there is evil that follows, because I can sense these things. I have my houses blessed, and still, it goes on. I am haunted for life. I will live in fear for the rest of my life. I even went to 3 doctors, and I am not crazy at all. My papa said I have a gift, but to me it is a life of fear of the evil ones that follow. I've done all I can to not fear, but I fear what I cannot see, and I fear what he will do to me or my children next. Frank even killed people in his waking life. My mom told him, while he was laying there bleeding to death, that she would forgive him if he would pray with her. He laughed and said, "It's too late. I sold my soul a long time ago." Then died. This is a true story and still goes on. If anyone knows anything I could do, please help. I am so over fearing the dead.
Number 3.
It has taken me a while to submit this story, as I was not sure how to put it all together. I was very young when all my supernatural experiences began, and it is difficult for me to write about occurrences which span a number of years of childhood horror, and to keep it all as short as possible, and to the point. However, I feel it is important that I start at the beginning, so that readers will know where I'm coming from, so to speak, bearing in mind the later stories which I would like to post. That said, I'll try to keep everything as coherent and concise as possible. I lived with my parents, 4 sisters, and brother, in a fairly large double-storied house. I lived in that house until I was 14 years old. The two eldest sisters were half-sisters, my father's daughters, not my mother's. To the rest of us kids, of course, there was no difference, as they were there when we were born. My father was a widower when he married my mother. My father passed away when I was 8 years old. I was the second youngest in the family. That is just a bit of background of letting you know the circumstances under which I was raised. I definitely did not have a quiet and cosseted upbringing. It would have been impossible in a family that size. Firstly, I totally accept that when I was toddler age, much of my screaming at night was due to normal childhood reasons. Things which I could not express, such as feeling ill, thirsty, or whatever the case may be. You know, the age when you cannot communicate your discomfort, and mommy has to guess. Also, even after I could communicate, nightmares could at times have been the reason for my blood-curdling screams. The term blood-curdling, in fact, comes from my family members. I have no idea what I sounded like, but I can believe it must have been pretty bad. Nevertheless, I was always told, "Go back to sleep. It was only a nightmare." Or, "You imagined it." Now that I've finished the lengthy introduction, let me relate some experiences. I cannot give years or dates, but from a very young age, perhaps 4 or so, I no longer believe the nightmare theory. I feel pretty certain that sleep paralysis was not involved either, because I actually used to see faces peering at me, and I heard footsteps around the house when everybody was in bed. I could move, and believe me, I could scream. This did not happen on a nightly basis, nor can I say how regularly it happened at that age, because quite frankly, I cannot remember. Neither do I remember whether I was touched physically by any entity. By the time I was more or less 6 years old, I stopped telling my family about what I saw and heard. I also tried to stop screaming, but every now and then I simply couldn't help myself, and I screamed. Hats off to my family though, especially my mother, as I was never chastised for this. Then again, neither did I get much sympathy, as they quite simply did not believe me. I must say it was a bit of an embarrassment when we had guests staying over, which happened quite often as we lived at the seaside, within walking distance from some really lovely swimming spots, especially for kids. Shame, you know. Dee gets very bad nightmares, some of them would say. By this stage, I was terrified of going to bed at night. When I did fall asleep, it was purely accidental. As mentioned, my father passed away when I was 8 years old, one of the most horrific times of my life, as I absolutely adored him. After this event, the activity escalated. I started seeing more shapes, not simply faces looking at me. On a few occasions, there were 2 ghosts, not in full bodily form, but gray-white in human shape. One was taller than the other, and I simply assumed that one was a man and the other a woman. Don't know why I thought that, as I'm quite sure I cannot distinguish the gender of either. Also, the poltergeist activity started. I could hear crockery being broken in the kitchen downstairs, cutlery thrown around, furniture being moved around. However, in the morning, everything would be absolutely normal, nothing broken, everything in its place. It was around about this time that I started pulling my eyebrows out. I looked a total mess. I had thick, very dark eyebrows, so try to imagine this: bald patches and bloody marks as I ripped relentlessly at my eyebrows, waiting for the nightly entertainment to begin. My eldest sister eventually cured me of this. She was approximately 13 years older than I was. She was married, pregnant with her first baby, and living in Port Elizabeth. Fortunately, it was school holidays. She and her husband came to visit for a weekend. We lived approximately 3 or 4 hours' drive away. She simply took things in hand, as was her wont, and told my mother she was taking me home with her for the rest of the holiday, as I obviously needed some attention. During the holiday, she made me promise that I would never do that to myself again. Of course, she did not believe that I saw or heard ghosts. Nothing new about that. Needless to say, I kept my promise to my sister, and only plucked my eyebrows when I was a lot older. I also believe I saw my father once, and he was trying to talk to me. I saw his mouth moving, but heard nothing. I was not frightened. This is quite funny, actually. Somewhere in my little mind it dawned on me that he was speaking French. My father was not French, but his father was. I don't even know whether my father could string a sentence together in French. Maybe a dream, maybe reality. At the time, I thought it was real. Though I want to relate the worst experience that I've ever had in my life. We had guests again, but I honestly cannot remember which family members they were. The only reason I know we had guests is because I had to sleep on the spare bed in my sister's bedroom. Her bedroom was also upstairs. There was a door which led onto an L-shaped balcony. The door was open, so it must have been sometime during the summer months. I was about 11, going on 12 at the time. Actually, I hated that room. I found it dark and spooky, even during the day. It was originally the master bedroom, where my parents had slept. But for some reason or another, my mother moved out of the room, and my sister moved in. My sister was fast asleep. To this day, it virtually takes a bomb to wake her up. Anyway, I heard her bedside lamp cord knocking against her headboard for what seemed to be an endless period of time. Shortly after that, the furniture on the balcony started moving around. I called her, but she didn't wake up. Now remember, I was awake. Totally 100%. The next thing, the most horrible looking creature I've ever seen in my life came gliding through the door from the balcony directly towards me. I should try to describe it as follows. It was short. It seemed to be looking me straight in the eye as I was lying in bed, although it seemed slightly hunched. It was broad and appeared to be furry. This creature was blacker than the dark bedroom, and believe me, it was almost black in that room. It had shiny red eyes, and it gave the impression that it was smiling at me, but not in a nice way at all. It was having a great time scaring the hell out of me. I do not remember seeing teeth, although they might have been there. The face was almost like a snout. I cannot say for how long it stood there, but it seemed like forever. I thought it wanted to kill me as I could not breathe. Only years later did I realize that I could not breathe because of the absolute terror that I felt. Then it started backing away, still facing me, out to the balcony. You guessed it, another blood-curdling scream, and I think this time the most blood-curdling scream they had ever heard from me. That was the only night my mother allowed me to sleep in her bed. I think she was beginning to accept that my life was not as normal as she would have liked it to have been.
Number 4.
Sometimes I find myself drowning in the memories of paranormal experiences that still linger in the back of my head from day to day. Some things just simply cannot be unseen. I think that spirits, demons, or whatever they may be, are beings that no living person could ever understand. In this case, seeing is believing is a good way to simply word it up for you non-believers out there. Maybe a family member, a friend, or even some stranger has told you that they have seen a ghost, and you thought it was ridiculous. I think anyone can understand why that is. My life was pretty ordinary when I was a young kid. After my encounters, every part of my life changed. The way I thought, the way I saw life. I changed for the better, and suddenly, the things that remained unanswered in my head made sense to me. I was blind, but now I can see. There are things that have happened to me that I've never been able to compare with anyone else. Things that would make your spine rattle. But every day I muster up the courage to move forward and forget. Although, some things can never be forgotten. My family owns an old house on the north shore of Scotland, in a place that not many have even heard of, Melness. I remember the house next door. It was old and abandoned. No one would buy it, and no one would enter it. It was a place that everyone feared. I don't know what really happened in that house, but it always creeped me out. It was made from rocks that were almost ancient. It must have been there for hundreds of years. There were no doors or windows blocking my view, but for some strange reason, even on the brightest of days, no one could ever see a glimpse of the inside of the house. To this day, everything about that place remains a mystery I'm too afraid to solve. I spent a lot of my childhood in Melness. It is an isolated place that isn't shown on many maps, but I can bet that anyone who visits will not have a hard time remembering the place. It was mostly highlands, fields, and beaches. Probably the most Scottish place anyone could go. I can still smell the salty Atlantic Sea. The water was pure, like it had never been touched. I can still see the washed-up shipwreck that lay on the sandy shore. My dad had always told me terrifying stories about Melness and the weird things that happened there when he was just a boy. He told me one specific story that really grabbed my attention. It was about the cave on the beach, that is also known to be haunted. He was on the beach one day, playing. As there was nothing much else to do in Melness, my dad, being brave, decided to go into this cave. To the right, when he was inside, there was a very dark corner, pitch black. It was a hole inside the wall of the cave, a hole so dark that no man could ever be brave enough to enter. He was scared, but he brushed it off and just assumed if there was anything there, it would be an animal. So instead of going near it, he just decided to throw some sand in to try and prove to himself that there was nothing there. It's okay, he thought, as nothing happened. But that was only until a few seconds later. Sand had been thrown back at him. Him being alone did not stay in that cave. He has been back to the cave occasionally, but the one thing that really spooks him to this day is that the hole was never seen again. I experienced my first paranormal event in the house in Melness. All of my family have seen and heard some weird, unnatural things in the house. Inside it wasn't very scary looking. In fact, it's very homey looking, until you spend your first night there. As you walk through the front door, the bathroom is what you first see. It was under the stairs. There were 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom upstairs, and downstairs, the right was the kitchen, and to the left, the living room. In the living room there was an old red curtain that separates it from the conservatory, and that was where I first encountered something that was somewhat terrifying. One night we were all asleep, me, my sister, my dad, and my papa. I was only at a young age, around the age of 6. I had woken up and dragged myself downstairs to the bathroom, and when I got to the bottom of the staircase, I couldn't help but notice that the curtain that led to the conservatory was blowing, as if the outside door was open. And it was. It was wide open. Which was very strange, as we lock all doors before bed, but me being young and oblivious to odd things that went on inside the house, just locked the door again and went to the bathroom and back to bed. The next morning, I was woken to the sound of my dad calling me from downstairs. I got up and went to see what he was shouting about. When I got downstairs, I said, "Daddy, what is it?" And he pointed to the conservatory and asked if I was up in the night. I slipped past the curtain and realized the door and all the windows were wide open. I was gobsmacked and just explained to him that it wasn't me, and told him about how I came down and shut the door. Then that night, a similar thing happened. Every single kitchen cupboard was left open. I was young, but I knew this wasn't a coincidence. The first time I'd ever seen a spirit wasn't in the house, in fact. It was in a rather new house I was living in with my mom and my stepdad. But I've always believed that if a spirit was following me, it followed me from Melness. As you walk into the house, you're in the living room, and there's a door separating the bedrooms and bathrooms. It happened in the middle of the night, just as I was going to the toilet again. The bathroom door faced the living room one, and as I passed by, I looked through the living room door. You couldn't really see through it properly, as it was textured glass, but you could still see shapes, like the couches and the table. But the one thing that caught my eye in that living room still gives me shivers down my spine. I had never seen anything more terrifying in my life. It was a tall black figure, almost like someone wearing a robe or dress. And as I looked in, I could tell that the figure had turned to me. I screamed at the top of my voice. I thought I was dead. I ran to my mom's room straight away, and lost my toenail under the door in the process. I jumped in between my mom and my stepdad, still screaming. I was terrified. My stepdad went through to the living room, and the black-cloaked figure that I had seen with my very own eyes had gone, like it was never there. But as I walked into the room behind him, I felt a disturbing chill that filled the air. I just wished that someone else had seen it, so people hadn't thought I was crazy, though I never doubted myself for a second. I never had thought that the second time I would see a ghost, it would be the same dark figure, but it was. I knew right away. The tall black silhouette that I'd already seen in my living room had come back to me again, only this time, I was back in Melness. Must have been around 2005. I was 9 years old. I had asked my stepbrother to come downstairs with me, so I could go to the bathroom. And he waited outside the bathroom door, and I felt a lot more safe. But I was still scared. I couldn't even look in the mirrors at night, or even take a glance out the window, as I was scared of what I might see glancing back. As I was just washing my hands in the sink, I suddenly heard banging and screaming at the door. It was my stepbrother, and he had obviously seen something that had scared him. I opened the door in a flash, and the first thing that caught my attention was the figure that I'd seen before, standing outside the front door. We both hid in the bathroom, sitting in the bath blocking the bathroom door with a set of drawers and anything else we could find. For about 3 hours we hid, not knowing what may be lurking at the other side of just a bit of wood. The only thing that was separating me from the thing I feared most was a bit of mahogany. I thought that maybe it was a good thing I was seeing it again, to reassure myself that it wasn't my immature imagination. I was just glad I had someone there to see it too. It was just what I needed. From that day on, I was sure it was following me. But what was it? A while after that, I went to the library with my friend to do some spiritual research, but I found no information that was important to me. It was only recently I have read some things that explained what my strange black shadow may be. I read about shadow people and demons, but I find that all really strange. I've never been one to believe in demons. There was still not enough information to explain to me what's going on. There was one last time that I've seen my ghostly follower, at the start of May last year. It had been 9 years since I had last saw it. Sometimes I'd almost forgotten, and I'd finally felt at peace, until that day. I was staying at my friend's house, and I was sitting on the back corner of his bed. It was against the wall to the right. In front of me was the television, and to the left was a large mirror on the wall. He had went out of the room to go for a shower, and I was watching something, when I got a strange itch in my back. I suddenly turned my head towards the mirror, and I saw it, right behind me. In the mirror I had saw the spirit I thought had left me, and was right behind my back. I had never had a more terrifying moment in my life until then, and it was worse. I could tell it had touched me. In the end, my friend thought I was nuts, and we lost contact. But now it seems that whatever is happening to me, whoever or whatever is following me, might never stop. It was only a couple of months ago I moved into my flat with my boyfriend. It was maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago I decided I've had enough, and decided to write this short story about my hauntings. I've been running in circles as I attempt to address questions for which I had no answers. It was the other week I felt that maybe it's going too far. My boyfriend was working in Glasgow, which is a half-hour train ride away. It was about 9 o'clock at night and it was dark. It was just me and my cat in the house, and I was doing my makeup, getting ready to go out. I was holding my small mirror in my hand in front of me when I heard my cat make a really weird noise. I went through to the bedroom, and she looked terrified, hiding behind the blinds. Weird cat, I thought to myself. I looked around to see what may have disturbed her. I opened the walk-in cupboard for her, which needs to be pulled and pushed really hard as it gets jammed. Then I went back to the living room and sat back down on the couch, leaving the bedroom door open for me to see through. I then carried on doing my makeup, looking in my small mirror while putting on foundation. Suddenly, there was a huge, very loud bang as if a door had actually been slammed shut. I looked through, and it was the cupboard door, and I could see my cat sitting on the bed staring at it. This is when I got really scared, and I looked back down at my makeup mirror to close it and put everything down, and there was a huge crack going through it. I didn't know what else to do, except take my cat outside, which I did. I told my boyfriend everything, and it was only a few days later that windows started unlocking by themselves. It's been really scary to experience this so often, and I'd really appreciate some help.
Number 5.
I've been dating my boyfriend for a year and a half now. When we first met, I noticed one morning that he had 2 big scratches down his back. He then told me that he has always woken up with random scratches. These scratches are also in places that he could not possibly inflict on himself. Some are deep and last for weeks. Some even leave scars. As long as he can remember, he has always felt a presence of some sort around him. Once, when he was younger, he was sitting in a car talking with a friend. They were alone talking for about an hour. The whole time the car was shut off and not operating. She started talking to him about ghosts. My boyfriend told her that he gets uncomfortable talking about such things, since every time he does, something unexplainable always ends up happening. He started to feel uncomfortable and agitated. Then all of a sudden, the motor for the automatic window in the back driver's seat started humming loudly out of control, then stopped. Strange things started happening around me since he started staying with me. I lived in an apartment with friends for about 4 months prior to meeting him, and never had any prior experiences with paranormal situations myself. One night, we had fallen asleep on the couch. While asleep, I felt 3 hard nudges on my shoulder. I then asked my boyfriend to please stop. I felt one more harder nudge. Frustrated, I turned to him to tell him to stop, and saw he was asleep. I then moved in with him into an apartment. When we first moved in, during the day, we were inspecting our new place. Walking through the kitchen, towards our bathroom and bedroom area, we caught a quick glance at what appeared to be a dark shadow the size of an adult cat running. It didn't come from around the hallway corner. It just seemed to appear and then very quickly made its way behind the refrigerator and disappeared. It appeared so lifelike that it startled us both and made us both stop suddenly. We looked, and there was no animal or anything behind our refrigerator, not even a space to which it could escape or hide. He could work out of town all week. My sister was over and we were cleaning. I was in my bathroom and saw a quick black shadow go past in my mirror, heading down the hallway into my room. Thinking it was my boyfriend surprising me by coming home early, I ran into my bedroom, and no one was there. I walked out into the living room where my sister was, and asked her if anyone had come inside. She told me no. My boyfriend wasn't due home for another 2 days. He surprised me later that night by coming home. My sister had stayed with us for a few weeks. She was sleeping on the couch one night. My boyfriend had just arrived home from working out of town all week. Mind you, nothing happens while he's away, only the days he returns, or the day before he returns. One night, while she started drifting off into sleep, she was startled by the television flipping through channels, then went off. She was so frightened and came to wake me up. I told her the TV was fine and to go back to sleep. She slept with the lights on. A few days later, my boyfriend and I were leaving the apartment. We shut off the TV. We turned around to walk out of the room, and it came back on. We shut it off again and left. We had no other incidents with that television. One time I had went with him out of town. It was dark out, about 1 a.m. He would have to drive down some dirt roads in Westport, New York. There was nothing but woods and a few houses. He had to pick up and drop off his company vehicles there. We were unloading our stuff from the company vehicle into our truck to head back home. I then heard whispers coming from the woods across the road. At first, I didn't pay any mind to it, until I heard it the second time along with some movement, and grabbed hold of my boyfriend. He asked, "What? What's wrong?" I said, "Shh. Did you hear that?" He told me no. He hadn't heard anything. I was so scared that I jumped into the truck through the driver's side, because I did not want to walk around to the passenger side. The most frightening thing that recently happened that made me believe him was an incident involving my own child. We were staying at my father's house. The upstairs is open, kind of like a loft. My boyfriend had gotten up to use the bathroom. I did not feel him get up out of bed, nor did I wake up when he turned on the lamp. I did, however, wake up to see him staring at the bed my son was sleeping in, kind of crouched down. I then asked him, "What are you doing?" He told me, "Nothing. I have to go to the bathroom." He went downstairs, used the bathroom, and returned to bed. The next morning, I asked him why he was hunched over staring at my child last night. He then asked me if my sister had come home in the night and crawled into bed with my son. I told him no. She had been gone to her boyfriend's for the past few days. He then told me he saw the outline of a small body laying covered up in bed next to my son, with its back to my son. He said he had the strongest, almost uncontrollable urge to reach out and touch the leg of whom he thought was my sister. But then, reason came to play, that it would be weird if he had touched my sister in bed while she was sleeping. So he didn't. One night, we were walking down my father's road. We were in an argument. It was dark, and I wanted to go back to my father's house. We were approaching the only street light at the end of the road. I heard noises in the woods and at first brushed it off as animals. Being from the North Country, you get used to some noises. I then realized these weren't animal sounds we were hearing. I looked and caught a glimpse of a woman stepping out of the woods towards the road. Towards us. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the street light. I was terrified. I'd never seen anything like that before. He told me to calm down and keep walking. I refused, and called my sister to come pick me up. We were 2 miles away from my dad's. I got into the car and left my boyfriend there. He then called me saying he was walking back. Then he screamed and the phone sounded as if it was thrown. He called me back and begged me to go get him. I picked him up at the end of the street. There were 3 deep scratch marks down his face. He then told me, while extremely shook up, that the phone felt as if it were ripped out of his hands. I then asked what happened to his face. He was unaware of the marks, but said he felt a burning sensation. He looked, and became even more frightened to see the marks on his face. I see shadows. Once, at night, at the end of my bed. We now live in a different apartment and have strange things happen here as well. Doors opening right in front of us. With our closet door, you have to actually turn the knob to open it. It won't just pop open. But some days, you hear the knob jiggle and actually see it turn. Then, it slowly opens up. No wind or anything else interfering. Is there something, or things, following my boyfriend? It doesn't seem as if it's the same spirit. Sometimes we don't feel threatened, while other times we are terrified. Does my boyfriend attract things that we cannot understand? Or is this something else?
Number 6.
I was brought up and always felt it was best to speak to someone of my experiences. My tradition, Native American. We have many beliefs in the spiritual and otherworldly creatures. My family shares the same gift as I do. Of course, not all of us have it. I was told by my grandmother that we have a strong line of medicine men and women in our family. When I was young, I was able to sense the presences of a spirit. As I got older, my senses heightened, and it came to where I knew if it was male or female, a child or an adult. Now it's to where I see them. Sometimes shadows, mists, a glow, and others as real as anyone else. Right now, I live in Okinawa, Japan. I moved here in April of 2010. My family calls this a gift, but at times it's real fear. I've been trying to control what I allow myself to see and feel, which hasn't been easy. There is so much activity on this island that at times it's difficult to filter what's actually there and what's not. I have 3 experiences that will forever stay with me. The first time I arrived here, my husband was driving past a military area, which made me feel very uncomfortable. After that feeling, I've seen a Japanese male walking along the road in front of us. Something about him was unsettling. I could feel it in my gut and under my skin. To me, the way he was walking didn't seem that he touched the ground. Twice it looked like he would bulb up taller, then back down to size. After seeing this, I couldn't take my eyes off him. It was towards the evening, just before dark. There was a light glow with some pink and purple in the sky. As we drove closer, he started to fade away. We got to the point where I seen him last. I started looking around with no sign of him anywhere. My husband asked what's wrong. I explained to him that I didn't like the feeling the area was giving, and what I saw. He then explained to me about the area and stories that are connected to it. Unfortunately, I can't share details due to it being a military base. He told me that it's an old munitions storage, and there were some deaths involved. Sounds of guns and explosions in the distance when there shouldn't be. There's times when guards will see old Japanese soldiers geared up for battle, and upon being approached, they would disappear. For all I know, what I seen that evening could have been a Japanese soldier back in 1945. My second encounter here was in my own home. I live in what the Japanese call a mansion, but it's actually an apartment, American style. For several days, whenever I woke up to go to the bathroom, I felt someone watching from the spare bedroom. Night after night this continued. The room has always felt stuffy and dark. I went into the room one night to confront whatever was in there. My entire body started to tingle, and I felt almost empty. I had to get out of the room. I went right back to bed. That night, I slept close to my husband. Third time, I was home alone. My husband was working the night shift. I was asleep when noises at the foot of my bed woke me up. It was the sound of crinkling paper. I laid in bed listening to it, and then it stopped. We didn't own any animals at this time. I admit, I was scared. After that, I felt a presence. It felt like a child, pacing back and forth, from the foot of my bed to the side of the bed I was sleeping on. My body started getting the chills, and I was feeling sick in the stomach. The only other way I can describe it was the feeling of a hangover. I covered my head and fell back to sleep. But not for long. I woke to what I thought was my husband finally home. My nerves finally could settle. I could hear his boot on the tile floor walk from the door to the office, but he never came to the room. I thought he wasn't tired yet, and he probably went in the office to play on the computer. So I fell asleep. I woke up to the floor creak at our bedroom door, half asleep, thinking my husband was finally coming to bed. As this presence got closer to the bed, and I felt it lean over, I knew it wasn't him. All I could do was lay in bed with this thing staring at me, inches away from my face. I imagined myself grabbing its hair and pushing it away from me. After a few moments, which felt like hours, my heart stopped racing. Still scared, though. I mustered up the courage to get out of the bed, to tell my husband what happened, and to come to bed. I got up, and the place was dark. I wondered if he stepped out, but there was no evidence of him ever being home. I slept light for the rest of the night, with the TV on, and again heard the front door open. I yelled out my husband's name to make sure it was him. Thank God, it was him. I don't know how much more I could have taken. I told him my experience, that we are getting a cat, and I was going to smudge the house in the morning. When I woke up, I was angry about what these spirits put me through. I smudged our home, fed up. I was basically yelling at them to get out. In my tradition, cats can see spirits, and they will protect those they love. We now own 2 cats. Since that day, I haven't had any encounters in my home anymore. Outside, though, is another story.
Number 7.
This is my first post here, and I've been catching up on other people's experiences during the holidays. My experiences have always been rough. I can narrow it down to my first experience with an evil spirit from when I was 15. I never really believed it until some years later, but here we go. When I was 15 years old, I belonged to a church group. It was a Catholic prayer group, and me and my older sister always hung out with the other kids. It was during the summer times. There were a lot of seminars for this church group. Me and my sister were signed up to go to a seminar specifically for the ages 13 through 21. It was here that I met a guy named Justin. Justin was a troubled kid from California, but claimed he had a gift that he could see spirits in people's auras. He came in a group with 4 other guys from California, and they stayed at my house. After the seminar was over, we decided to have some fun and go out at night. The 7 of us crammed in one car, my sister driving, 2 in the passenger and 5 in the back. We met up with other teenagers from the group, so there should have been about 20 or so of us. Justin stayed in the car because he was scared. I guess he saw some things. This is in Seattle, Washington, and the place we went to is called Kabuta Gardens. I can't remember the time, but I'm sure it was past midnight. In the middle of the park is a house where an Asian family used to live. The story for that was the father got possessed and killed his wife, his 17-year-old daughter, and then himself on his daughter's birthday. The house was boarded up with a fence surrounding it. The dare and urban legend was, if it was your 17th birthday, and you knocked on the door, you would die a week later. It was one of the kids' birthday, and he went up to knock on the door. While he was getting pumped up to go, a few of us were throwing rocks at the house. For every rock we threw, a tap would come from the house. Amazed by this, just one of us threw rocks, while the rest listened. Sure enough, the sound of the rock hitting the house was replied to by a sound from the inside of the house. We stopped as the birthday boy went to knock on the door. While he was climbing the fence, I was at the side of the house, standing by whatever light I could get from the moon. I looked at the house and saw 3 little red fireflies, moving around in circles, and everywhere all on the side of the house. I was excited, because I'd never seen fireflies before. Well, birthday boy climbed the fence and knocked on the door 3 times. The house responded with 3 knocks. He ran and climbed the fence while all of us just started to run. My sister ran into a rock, and she had scraped her leg on it. Me and my sister were close, so I got mad and started cursing at the house and threw rocks at it. All of a sudden, we were fighting each other all the way back to the car. Let's keep in mind that I was 15. I didn't swear or talk bad like that until I joined the Marine Corps. I get in the car and Justin is staring at me. I sit right next to him and say, "What the fuck are you looking at?" He looks away and says nothing. On the drive home, me and my sister were fighting, and I felt like I was watching me argue with her through my eyes. I know that sounds weird, but it was as if the real me was trapped inside my body, while my mouth and mind was controlled by something else. I also remember feeling good at the things I told her. We get to our house and we all get out. Justin talks to the rest of the group, and I just want to sleep. They tell me to walk around in a circle. I tell them to fuck off. I'm tired. I do it anyway, because they weren't going in the house until I did it. They had me walk in circles, back and forth. Then Justin said that there was a tiny black dot following me, and that it wasn't anything good. Scared, I agree to be preyed upon so that this black dot doesn't get in the house. The group surrounds me and prays over me, and I feel calm and lightweight. We go inside the house, move down to the basement, and I ask Justin what he thinks it was. He said it was a demon, and it attached itself to me while we were at the park. I asked him if it was gone, and he said no. Without even looking, he said it was outside the sliding glass door looking at me, with long black hair, gray skin, and red eyes. He said it was smiling at me, as if to say it will be back for me, or a "don't worry, I'll get you later" type of look. A few days later, the guys leave, and I start my first year of high school. I question myself about Justin, and wonder if it was all real, or if he was lying. I tell myself he's just a troubled kid from California, and I labeled him as a liar. I never hear from him again. I forget about everything and moved on with my life because high school is more important than anything in the world. Skip to 7 years later. I'm 22, in the United States Marine Corps on security duty with some Navy guy in some third world country. Since it was going to be 8 hours long, we decided to talk to each other. I find out he's Christian and has a religious group of friends that want to fight evil and help people. I kind of laugh at him, but we exchange stories and experiences. and then I'd tell him what happened when I was 15. While telling him, I kept getting annoyed at him because he kept looking away like I was shining a flashlight in his face. He just wouldn't look at me. I finish, and he tells me he saw the demon. I didn't believe him at first because I pretty much repeated the description of the demon that Justin saw. He described in detail, not the demon, but my house. He said he saw my basement and the sliding glass door as if he was standing on the steps. He saw the couches, the mirror, the piano, the tables, and through the sliding glass door was the demon and darkness. He couldn't look at me because he had flashes of my house and of the demon. He knew I was telling the truth because he saw it himself. Even though it was right in front of my face, I still really didn't believe Justin or the Navy guy. Fast forward to deployment leave, which was August of 2009. I'm back in Seattle, and I go on a police ride with my brother-in-law. Guess where we go on our lunch break? Kabuta Gardens, of course, where it all started. I ask him if there was really a murder-suicide there, and he tells me yes. Apparently it was a big thing before he joined the SPD. Then he repeated the whole urban legend about being 17 and knocking on the door. At that moment, it dawns on me. This is Seattle, Washington. There are no fireflies in Seattle, Washington. I looked up videos of fireflies on YouTube, and they didn't move like the things I saw at the house. The red lights I saw were crazy movement, but were in some sort of unison with each other. I don't know what they were, so I'm not even going to try to explain further. After all that, I still questioned what I saw and felt. The random pairing of a U.S. Marine and a U.S. sailor on guard duty talking about that night. His visions and reassurance that the demon, who he knows by name, wants me to stray away from my religious beliefs. My research with my brother-in-law, the actual murder-suicide, and the non-existent fireflies in Seattle. Kabuta Gardens is said to be one of the most haunted places in Washington, where you would have to go there in even numbers of people. If you don't, a spirit will attach to you to make it even. I knew the answers were right there in front of my face, but at the time, I didn't believe it. From the time I got home from that deployment to now, I know that was just the beginning. That evil spirit did come back for me. But those experiences will be for another time.
Number 8.
This might be a long story. It's been going on since I was little. So I'll start off with my family background. I was born and raised in Lithuania, in a large town called Kaunas. My family, as far as I know, is all from Lithuania. My grandparents, strangely from both sides, are very superstitious towards kind of strange things, such as covering all reflective surfaces in the house after a person dies, because their spirit might be trapped in a mirror. Or if you rock an empty chair, it means you're rocking your dead child. Never ring a bell in the house, or it means that you're calling up the devil. And I've gotten into trouble for doing those things when I was little. When I was little, I used to have horrible night terrors. My brother told me because we lived in a 2-bedroom apartment and shared a bedroom. I would simply scream and thrash around, and my parents weren't ever able to wake me up. And recently, I learned that I would get up in the middle of the night and walk around, and when Mom asked me what I was doing, I would reply that I was going home. I'm not sure how old I was. I just know that one day, it all stopped. When I asked my dad why I used to have those night terrors, one night when he had a little too much to drink, he told me he knew, but would take it to his grave. It scared me a little because he himself looked slightly scared. Well, later in life we moved to America. It was when I was 9. Now we live in northern Indiana, near South Bend, and such, where paranormal activity tends to happen at times. For a time, everything was completely normal. Nothing major happened. Sure, some weird noises or creaks or such, but nothing that was overly disturbing. Not until we moved into our third house that we had just built. Things haven't been settling recently. At times I hear my name being called. One time, when it was just me and my mom. My mom was napping at the time, and I was on the other side of the house. I could have sworn my mom screamed my name, like she needed desperate help. I bolted from my seat and ran into her bedroom, swinging the door wide open, and found her sound asleep. There are times when I walk around the house and feel like I've just passed through something extremely cold. And other times, I'll feel like I've actually run into someone or something, but nothing will be around me. There are odd shapes I see around our house sometimes, and times I get a very bad feeling, like something is just simply wrong. One day I told my brother about these things. He surprised me by saying he was experiencing the very same things. We were both very close, and always tell each other everything. We had a big power outage once, so me and my brother told my dad we'd stay up and make sure the basement doesn't flood. My brother's girlfriend tried staying up, but went to sleep. So through the night, me and my brother just stayed up, talking, and reading books by flashlight. My dog, a German Shepherd, was asleep by our living room window. Then when the sun started to rise, it was barely light. I heard a very odd and loud screech. It was loud enough to have wakened anyone, very high-pitched, and somehow electronic sounding. I thought it was just my brother's phone or something, and didn't say anything. Then he asked me if I heard it too. Apparently, it wasn't him, or me, and it was loud enough to wake the parents or the dog. She's very jumpy, but she was still asleep. When I called her, she didn't even respond. Me and my brother exchanged looks, but didn't say anything else. I had a dream one night too, a little before I turned 16. It was very vivid. In most dreams, things will be different. Your house will 1 second turn into a cave or something. This dream, everything was exact. I was sitting on my porch with my dog beside me. My parents were out in the yard too. Everything was exactly like it should be. From the woods came 3 hooded people. I couldn't see their face, due to the fact that they had their hoods up. They asked me to come with them, told me I needed to go home. And I wanted to. I desperately wanted to. But I didn't want to leave my parents yet. So I told them to come back at midnight. They said maybe, and left. Haven't had a dream like that since. My dad told me the dreams he would have sometimes, about strange hooded people coming and asking for me and my brother, promising great things or big money for him, and he said he always refused. One time, when I was just born, my dad said he had a dream of his dead grandpa coming to talk to him when we were all at the store. Me, my mom, my brother, and my dad. His grandfather led him away talking to him and such, and suddenly my dad realized that we weren't around, that he wasn't protecting us anymore, and when he turned back to his grandfather, he was gone. But he found his way back and found us again. I tried talking to my brother about these things. Weird shapes I see, or strange callings. He always refuses to talk about it. And when I tried talking to either of my parents, they both got nervous and almost scared, real mad. They would tell me to shut up about it. On a recent trip back home to my country, I learned that we used to have a great life. My dad was great too. He used to be amazing at sports and always took first place. He used to be great in drama and had a wonderful job where he traveled around Europe, and later, to be closer to us, had a job as a head manager of a large company. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and we had money and everything was close to being perfect. Then we all moved away real fast, to another country for some reason. I never thought much about it until now. Maybe this is me being imaginative, but something just doesn't settle right with me. I feel like my family is hiding something from me, and all I want to know is, well, I just want to know. All my weird dreams, strange occurrences, or my strange want for something I can't quench at times. Waking up in the middle of the night to have my name called. I've always been interested in this type of, well, whatever you want to call it. And I feel like I shouldn't have a normal life. Like there's something more out there. And all I want to do is understand. I just want to know I'm not crazy. So please, if my story makes any sense to you, if you know a place I could possibly turn to, help me. I just want to know.
Number 9.
So, for as long as I can remember, I have been around ghosts and spirits in my everyday life. Why? I don't know. But out of everyone in my family, I've had the most paranormal encounters, although we each have our fair share of encounters. But nowadays, it seems as if I'm the only one who is still seeing entities, and I have no idea why. So, let's go to the beginning, where these things all started to happen. I was about 3 years old when my parents started to notice weird things. According to them, I would have these night terrors all the time that would scare me shitless. And they were all about some sort of weird entity. Not one night terror didn't include this entity. I can vaguely remember what it looked like. I was too young to remember it all. But it was usually a dark, shadowy figure with red glowing eyes. Sounds like your average demon, right? Well, this was no regular entity. Not long after I saw it in my dreams, maybe about 2 or 3 years after, I actually started to see it in real life. What I thought was only something that existed in my mind was about to get a whole lot realer. I don't recall ever seeing this entity during the day, but I sure did see a whole lot of it during the night. Although it never moved or made a noise, it stared me down with its red eyes. After we moved out of that house when I was about 6, we moved into another one, which was a bit newer. And what do you know? I stopped seeing it after a while. But that was not the last of the entity. It came back as an even more terrifying thing. Now, I have no idea if this was the same sort of entity that stalked me before, but it certainly seemed like it. This form of the entity took its time in introducing itself to me, but did so in the same manner as before. I was about 8 and a half when it started to manifest in my dreams. But this time it did not show itself fully. I would see a shadow of it near the end of my dream, or when I was about to wake up screaming. And it would always mumble something that I could not comprehend. After many, many dreams like this, it decided to take it a step further when I had my first false awakening. In this false awakening, I woke up in my bed and looked around my room, and saw nothing, but I heard loud footsteps approaching from down the hall. I couldn't move or speak, and the footsteps were getting closer and closer. All of a sudden, the footsteps stopped, and I saw a shadowy figure wearing a trench coat standing in my doorway. There were no details to it, other than the fact that it looked like a human being. Once again, it mumbled something I could not hear before morphing into some sort of cloud of darkness and shooting towards me. At that point, I woke up. Or so I thought. I had another dream where almost the exact same thing happened, and then I woke up for real. I didn't sleep easy for weeks after that. But luckily, things took a turn for the better. After that incident, the entity left, and did not come back to me for a while. A couple years later, we had moved into another house in the, sketchy side of town, since money was tight at the time. But ever since day one, I had the feeling that something about this house was wrong. I would not even dare to go down into the basement, and to make everything worse, a man was murdered down on the corner of our block, about 3 houses away from ours. I thought nothing of it at first, but I began to notice something about that spot whenever I was standing there, getting ready to cross the road to go to the park. That spot was always cold, even in the blazing hot summer weather. And to make things even stranger, I was the only one who could feel it. None of my sisters could, not even my parents. I was the only one who could feel the coldness of that spot. Needless to say, I avoided it all the time shortly after. Now about the house. This house was basically the equivalent of hell, for me anyway. I felt like I was being watched 24/7 by something inside of the house. Rooms would inexplicably turn warmer or colder when I walked into them. I heard my name called more than once while home alone. It only ever happened when I was home alone too. I would constantly see strange shadows that seemed to morph or resemble a person, and I would see apparitions from time to time. None of these ever happened to my other family members, except for two of my sisters, who claimed to see apparitions a lot. The most common apparition that I saw was that of a little boy, about 7 to 8 years old. He freaked me out the most because he would always appear to be staring at you, although he had no eyes. It looked as if they had been gouged out with a knife. He appeared constantly in your path, or in places where you would spot him for a second, and then he would disappear. The other apparition was of a little girl. Fitting, huh? Now, I only saw her once, but she was the reason I didn't want to go back downstairs, ever again. I was putting something in the deep freeze, when out of the corner of my eye I saw someone under the stairwell. Assuming it was the little boy, I paid no attention. He seemed to be friendly, despite his disturbing appearance. But then, I noticed that this entity was not disappearing like the little boy always did. So I looked up, and saw what looked like a little girl about 5 to 6 years old in old-timey clothes sitting there, staring at me. I didn't remember much after that, since I booked it out of the room and up the stairs. The next thing I want to talk about is the fact that I had my name called more than once by something not human. But whatever was calling my name was quite possibly the most sinister thing I've ever met. It almost seemed like the devil himself was calling me. But it did not sound like the devil. It imitated the sound of my mother's voice. Usually, it would call my name, and I would go out of my room, only to find myself completely alone. I would look around a little just to see if anyone was indeed there, but there never would be. But the most unsettling part about this was that after I looked around, I would hear heavy footsteps coming up from the basement. And this happened every time. All of these events, except for the little girl, would happen to me on a daily basis, and never ceased. But after my parents noticed my declining mental state, they decided that it was time to move once again. So a few years later, we moved to the house in which I am currently typing this out. My mental state turned back to normal, and I was happier than ever now that these things have stopped happening to me. But things are getting weird again, and it's all just started. For the first time in about over 3 years, I saw my first apparition. It was last week. I got home from school and stepped in the back door. I took off my backpack and looked up just in time to see a pair of what seemed like at the time disembodied legs rushing into the living room. Figuring it was my mom's boyfriend, I thought nothing of it. Until I realized I was home alone. I hid in my room for the rest of the day, and refused to come out after that. I don't want all this to happen again, as I've already been traumatized from past events, but it's almost as if these entities won't leave me alone. None of my family members report anything out of the ordinary about this house, but I can just tell that there's something here, something that won't leave me alone.
Number 10.
All my life, I have seen and experienced things that most people don't. I know, that sounds overused and expected, but please, hear me out. When I was growing up, I lived in a trailer bought by my parents. Other than negativity generated by my biological father, who was an alcoholic, drug-abusing, paranoid schizo, nothing odd or tragic happened in that trailer. The only mental problem I have is depression, as determined by a licensed psychiatrist. So I'm not now, nor have I ever been, crazy. Nevertheless, I remember seeing shadows moving around whatever room I was in, even following me outside at times. I was notorious for waking up screaming or crying from terrible nightmares, even when I was a teen. I would hear conversations when no one else was home. I would hear a little girl giggling, playing, and humming Brahms' lullaby. I remember several times I was alone in my room playing, and I would hear her run down the hallway, stop at my door, run back to the living room, then repeat. Besides the little girl, I have seen 3 apparitions. A young Civil War soldier, with curly blonde hair and a big nose, a heavy-set old man in overalls, and a large white human-shaped light. The light walked through my brother's bedroom wall, across the hallway, and through the opposite wall, which leads to outside. Where a normal person would have dark shadows due to light, this thing had varied levels of gold instead. Several doors would close, or sound like they were closing, by themselves. Household items would move or even disappear, especially when the family went on vacation. I never slept in the dark, because I would always feel someone was watching me, or things in my room would move. Once, I even woke up and saw a hanger floating in midair, but when I jumped up to turn on the overhead light, it was lying on my clothes pile on the floor. Another time, I remember waking up because I could feel a weight on the end of my bed, laying across my feet. I sat up, and as I did, a dark shadow with red eyes sat up with me and looked at me. I hid under the covers and could feel it get up off the bed. I hid under the covers so long I fell asleep under them. The only time I talked directly to the spirits there was when I was about 9-ish. I had convinced myself I was being a baby, and ghosts weren't real. So I sat on my bed, faced my closet, and challenged the spirits. "Move something," I remember saying. "Come on, I dare you. If you're real, you do something. Show yourself." A collectible doll fell off my wall shelf with enough force to miss the dresser beneath it and land in the middle of my floor. The most recent extreme experience I had in that house was when I was 14. I was home alone and had been feeling uneasy, so I turned on the TV. The feeling just grew stronger, so I turned on the radio and all the lights in the house and curled up in a recliner in the living room. My mother called me, and as I was talking to her and trying to tell her what was happening, I could feel something circling the recliner. There was no sound and no image, just the feeling. The more I tried to say to my mom, the angrier it seemed to get, and the faster it circled. Finally, I screamed in tears, "Mom, get me out of here! It's mad at me!" I spent the rest of the day at my grandparents' and begged my mom not to take me home. It took me years to gain the confidence to close the door behind me after that. I even used the bathroom with the door open, because I was so terrified. I accepted the fact that the trailer was haunted, though I didn't know why. When I got a job at 16, it was only a few days before odd things started happening there, too. The customer bell over the front door would ring for no reason. I would see someone take a seat, go out to take their order, and there would be no one there. And, like at home, things would move around. Customers and other workers noticed things as well, and the place was closed in 6 months. My second and current job seemed normal, until my second week. Suddenly, 3 people have seen an old woman who vanishes. Items fall off the shelves. People hear their names being called. Workers have been touched by invisible hands, and items start moving right in front of people's eyes. All since I started working there. When I turned 19, I started dating a guy who had never had a solid paranormal experience in his life. After a couple of months of dating, he told me he and his family had been experiencing odd things around the house, such as whispers, footsteps, and electrical problems. The main culprit? A little girl he, his mother, and his teenage sister had all seen on separate occasions, though he had also seen a floating head he described as being like the drama masks. A year and a half later, my boyfriend and I moved into an apartment in a different city in a different county. For a while, things were quiet. I could sleep well in the dark. I had no problem being home alone, and my boyfriend was totally at ease. Within 2 months, though, things started up, just as they always have. Fleeting shadows, lights that flash and move between blinks, nightmares, uneasy watched feelings. Recently, there's been a terrifying twist to all of this. I had a nightmare one night that my boyfriend couldn't wake me from. There was this shadow thing on the end of the bed, gripping the blankets by my feet. It was going to get me. It just had that threatening feeling that it was about to crawl over my legs, pin me down, and get me. It was so vivid. I'm still remembering the details 4 days later, and I'm more fearful than ever. I've done a sage cleansing once, but I don't think it had any effect. I need help. I'm terrified. My boyfriend is uncomfortable around me, and people who have known me a long time dread me coming over because weird things always happen. I don't know what to do. Please help me. So, how's it been going, guys? I'm back. In all seriousness, though, I'm very sorry about my long absence, but allow me to explain. Well, I should first start by saying that I did not plan on being gone for this long. Maybe a week or so, but that turned to 2 weeks, and then a month. And now my most recent video, before this one, is 2 months old, at least. The thing is, my heart just wasn't in it at the time. Not only that, but I became so obsessed with the stats and growth of my channel that I just felt I had to take a break and come back when I felt I was ready. Of course, this is not counting certain personal things I had to deal with during this absence. I should mention, though, that I am planning some new things for this channel. Once I get over 1,000 subscribers, though I'm not sure how much over, I'm thinking I may do something akin to a podcast or something. Maybe we can hang out and talk about different scary things such as the true stories, urban legends, horror movies, or whatever else pertaining to the topic. I'm also going to start a new series of videos here, but I can't say when. Primarily because I don't break promises, and things with this channel are just too fluid. What I can say is that it will be a series where each video focuses on different topics. The first one will be EVPs, so stay tuned for that. Anyway, with this newfound mindset with this channel, I can say that I'm glad to be back. As thanks for being patient, I decided to make another longer video. So, I hope you enjoyed it. Here's to more videos to come. If it's fear you're after, welcome home.